Well, hello, friends, and welcome to a live edition of Syracuse Sports. Football is back. Day one of training camp is in the books. We are 30 days away from the start of the 2024 Syracuse football season, Ohio, at the JMA Wireless Dome. But first, Syracuse football must sweat through training camp, and Emily Leiker and I are going to sweat through this here podcast. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We are going to tell you all about day one at Syracuse football training camp. We are going to answer some questions from our Syracuse Sports Insiders who got our first observations right off the practice field this morning. They got videos right off the practice field this morning, so it pays to be a Syracuse Sports Insider, friends. No better time to be a Syracuse Sports Insider than now with the training camp updates that you will get first and exclusively. And we're also going to hear from Syracuse head coach Fran Brown and Syracuse QB1 Kyle McCord through the show as well. Speaking of which, Emily, that was really the big thing. So shortly after we walked out and saw our usual stretching at practice, they went into some offensive drills, and it did not take long for us to answer a question that a lot of our Syracuse Sports Insiders have had. How is Gatson looking? I'd say he's looking pretty good, right, Emily? 70-yard touchdown on what was like the third offensive play that they ran out there?
Yeah, I think it was the third. We had seen a catch by LaQuint Allen the play before, and then it was Kyle hit OG out on the right sideline downfield, and I can't quite remember who was in coverage on OG there, but I believe they were up against the first string defense. So my guess was it was Bellamy, but OG took it all the way down to the end and scored a touchdown to cap that kind of first string drive by the offense. So it was good. I mean, he wasn't like sprinting, going all out, but like just to see him moving and actually moving around and seeing him do things throughout practice, and certainly more than we saw him in the spring, was good to see.
And that's it. We didn't see him really go hard in the spring. They limited him in the spring. They actually focused a lot on blocking in the spring, OG included. And of course, they were being very cautious with Gatson in the spring, as they should. But he's back. He's 100%. He's ready to go. And as Fran Brown put it here, I asked Fran, is that what you're looking for? When OG, the connection with Kyle McCord, everything that maybe we didn't get to see in camp. Here's what Fran said about
It's
that.
like, yes, go at him again. It's like, hey, do not fall on it. You know what I mean? Telling the guys stay off of it. But just want to make sure they compete and get the other guy. Iron sharpens iron. So he was going against a player that could play and just getting him better and making sure that when he catches it, they'll tuck it and go. Don't catch it and be happy and then I get tackled. Catch it, tuck it, and go. That's the difference. Being able to make OG has to take it to another level. Really good player, loves football, has to do it, but I need him to take it to another level. You know, there's a little bit more nastiness and a little bit more dog in him that's there. You know, he has it all. He's ready. He's kind of just chill. If you come mess with him, he's going to bite. But I just want to say, like, I want him to go get him from the door.
Want to play one more clip here, Emily. And sorry to interrupt you there, but there was.
I was just gonna say, I think it was so funny that he called OG nasty.
Yes,
because like we talked to OG, and he is like the most mild-mannered dude. Like rarely says anything that will get you like controversial. We know he's one of the quieter leaders, and your Fran go, he's got that nastiness to him. I was like, that's
they're
awesome.
trying to get him to do that, and it was interesting. One thing that Fran said today was that the tight end room is the toughest on the team. It's the toughest position group on the team. And to include OG in that is interesting because, yeah, they do want him to be a little bit more of a dog, as Fran said today. But I thought this was interesting too. So Kyle McCord didn't really get to work with Gatson in the spring as much as he would like to, as much as he knew what he was capable of, what kind of receiver he was. So when Kyle was asked about OG later on, here's what he said.
Unfair, to be honest. I think wherever you line him up, it's a mismatch. I think he's too big for corners, too fast for safeties, too fast for linebackers. So it's definitely fun to, kind of line him up wherever and know that you have an advantage there.
And speaking of the just OG and then also the tight ends, I will say, like, the very first play of that first drill post stretching we saw, the first thing I clocked was OG and Dan Villari lined up together on the right side of the line. And we did get a mention from Fran later in that response about the tight end room that like 14 personnel is very much something this team can pull off this year, and they're going to use those big guys in that tight end room a lot.
Well, my heart fluttered a little bit too, Emily, while we're on my favorite subject. Did I hear Fidel Diggs is also working his way into the tight end room?
Mm-hmm.
Did I hear that correctly from Fran Brown?
It reminded me. So I talked to his high school coach back in the spring. And Fidel had wanted to be recruited at tight end, but because of his size and kind of stature, it was like, well, you're not going to get as high as offers for tight end as you would for defensive end. So I believe he did get a little action in the spring game at tight end, but to see them actually taking that seriously, and he might get out there and do some things on offense, like certainly that's something you want to play safe, right? Because you don't want Fidel Diggs to get hurt running a tight end play, and then you lose your edge rusher. But that would be fun to see early in the season.
Great red zone threat, 2-point conversions, something funky. See him run out there on the field. So be still my heart. That tight end position getting really interesting. So we answered that question right off the bat. I certainly expected to see OG going full speed and everything being kosher there, but to see that play right away. By the way, Elijah Robinson, Syracuse defensive coordinator, not happy that the offense got the best of this team. One thing that was interesting, Emily, was what we didn't see. What we didn't see at camp today. Now, it's only day one, and I'd imagine this is going to change as things go along here. Not a lot of visitors today. Whereas in the spring, that sideline was flooded, not just with recruits, by the way, with alums and just people, just scouts, and it was just a party. And anybody from the neighborhood, it seemed like, come on in and watch practice. Very quiet at camp today. It was a 9:40 practice. There's going to be some afternoon practices as we go, including tomorrow's practice, Friday's practice for this team. Coach Felicia Leggett-Jack and some of the women's basketball staff did stop by, but we didn't see the flood of visitors today. But I'd imagine as camp goes along, we're going to see more people stopping by.
Yeah, I would too. I was just trying to see if I pulled it up, but I don't think I've downloaded the new one yet. The recruiting calendar, we might be in a weird spot in the recruiting calendar right now where having kids on campus is kind of in a no-no zone. It might be a quiet period or a dead period. I can't remember. But certainly like other people, faculty and stuff like that we had seen in the spring, we didn't see as much of today, but it's also really hot out. Like I would not want to be standing out there if I didn't have to. So.
A lot different than the spring when it was, for the most part, when we started spring, there was still snow on the ground. I remember some fights that were going into snowbanks, and for the most part, it was a pretty pleasant spring. The weather was pretty favorable, and even the days when it wasn't, they brought it inside. By the way, the Ensley Center, very hot today. That's been a theme, Emily. You wrote a great story about this on syracuse.com. Fran's going old school. The team is living in a dorm, which they normally do not do, together. He took their car keys, so it's not like they're gallivanting all over town when they're not in practice doing whatever they got to do. He wants them together. They are walking from practice, the fields near the football facility to the dorm. They're all living in here. So look, we talked to the head trainer after practice as well, and I did ask him about like the aspect of training camp's all about toughness, and hear all these stories about building those bonds in camp, but also like it's 2024 and these guys have to utilize nutrition and science and ways to keep their bodies at optimal level here to go through a training camp. But Fran is still going old school here and saying, no, you guys are going to do it just like I did when I was a player. I like it.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny. He said that he is hoping some of the players get into some water balloon fights over on that end, and he might take part. And I will say, as I was pulling out of the parking lot at the end of the day, two of the newer faces, there are so many new kids, right? Like I don't recognize everyone yet, especially without jersey numbers on. But two players, one was trying to get on one of the bird scooters or whatever the brand is that we have here in Syracuse, and they were like yelling back and forth at each other. He's like, you got to put money in that thing. And so like they're finding ways to get around having to walk everywhere.
That's cheating. No, that's cheating. Come on, we got to rat those guys out. If you're going to do it, you got to go all the way.
It's right? being resourceful. It's being resourceful, right? Like Fran said yesterday, part of it is them not being entitled. They're not entitled to their car, but if they can find a different way where they don't have to walk, I don't know.
All right. I'll give them that. I don't know. I think that's cheating. I think you got to go all the way if you're going to do
I don't think
this.
he ended up putting money in it, to be honest. I think they ended up walking.
Couple other things here. Offensive line, it's only day one. I imagine that Dale Williams might mix things up a little bit. But what we saw from the offensive line today going from left to right was Savion Washington, who we got to talk about here, because that is a very large human.
I stood right next to him today. He is ginormous.
Big dude.
So tall.
Mark Petrie at left guard, John Ray Reed, who we've heard over and over again, Emily, has kind of emerged as a leader on the offensive line at center. You had, I'm forgetting off the top of my head here.
John Ray Reed is at center.
Reed at center, Jacob Bradford at right guard, and then Big Spoon, Demetrius Weatherspoon at right tackle. Now that's today. You might see Enrique Cruz work his way into the starting lineup. They might mix some things up as we go. That's what we saw, though, on day one. We've got to start with Savion Washington because he came in after spring practice, the transfer from Colorado. I think he's officially listed at 6'8", 340. How did you even reach up to interview this guy? He is a big dude.
I was having to actually like lean back and like look up to make eye contact with him. He's very, very tall. Yeah, pretty mild-mannered dude. I don't know how much he was talking at his previous two stops of Colorado and Kent State with media and stuff, but I think he's gonna have a really big role here, and it's interesting. Yesterday, one of the things Fran said about Savion, I asked about him, was what he had seen on tape was that he's a pretty confident player, but he wasn't always being given the tools or like the right setup or the right teammates alongside him last year at Colorado to succeed there. I think anyone who follows college football more broadly knows kind of how the storyline went with Colorado's offensive line last year. I mean, you were like 4 or 5 weeks into the season and Dion was calling for the whole group to be redone and made over and that he was going to go to the transfer portal. So that was interesting to hear from Fran. He kind of treaded a little more lightly than we've seen him tread, just in terms of he was like, I don't want to disrespect anything that Dion and his staff has done or anything like that. And but I think he feels like they are going to utilize Savion Washington to a better degree here, and that he is going to be able to really blossom as a player this season.
Both Kyle McCord and Fran Brown have called out Washington in media sessions before the first day of practice today as somebody who has stood out. You mentioned how mild-mannered he is in talking, but boy, what a human your eyes go directly to. So look, that's the impact of the transfer portal. Some of the names that have also been noted as leaders, Deion Wilson, who they call Tank. Obviously, McCord steps in as somebody who's got to establish himself as a leader and has the credentials to do it, but he's still new. So I think it's been interesting to see the mix of the new guys taking on those leadership roles with returning players like Reed, like Marlowe Wax on defense, like Justin Barron on defense. Today we talked to the offensive players. Tomorrow we'll talk to the defensive players and get their perspective on this. So any other first thoughts here, Emily, before we answer some questions from our Syracuse Sports Insiders, what we saw out there today?
Well, I was going to say on the leadership angle, like something that's been really interesting to me is like Fran's like complete attitude, like just he's completely like, this should be a player-led team. Like he is so invested in that being like how this team is structured. And like particularly with Kyle, like he sees Kyle as the number 2 man behind himself, if honestly not like T1 in terms of leadership and stuff like that. So like one thing that struck me today that he said, like he was talking about Kyle and his leadership ability, and Fran said, let me find it. If Coach Nixon, offensive coordinator, decided not to be here one day, then we'd say, Kyle, you call it. Coach Johnson and them do a great job, but Kyle knows what to call, where the call is, what we're looking for, how to move downfield. He's that kind of guy. He's intelligent. And I didn't get a chance to ask Kyle about this yet because I was talking to Savion when he was up at the podium, but like there's like quarterback leadership pressure, and then there's second to the head coach, we're going to have you call plays if the offensive coordinator is gone type leadership level. And so I mean, obviously that speaks so much about the trust that Fran has in Kyle and how highly he thinks of Kyle as a player. But I don't know. It's a whole new level to that player-led kind of mentality that I personally don't feel like I've really heard before from someone.
They have handed him the keys. And I think that's a hint that Fran gave us about what they're going to do one day. They're just going to hand it over to Kyle and be like, all right, you call the offense, you do this thing. And it actually leans in, Emily, to the first couple of questions we got from our Syracuse Sports Insiders. So John says this: I'm more than a little concerned about the backup quarterback situation. What kind of shape is the program in if McCord goes down? Will F with a similar question: what would you say the gap is between Kyle and the rest of the quarterback room? So to answer both of your questions, it's significant. It's significant in what Emily just laid out, leadership-wise. No other quarterback in this room just has that kind of command of the offense, that kind of command of the team, nor are they as physically gifted as McCord. I mean, Emily, we've seen it in spring. We saw it again today, right? That pass we mentioned to OG and just throughout practice. Kyle just looks the part, okay? Mm-hmm. This is a guy that's buttoned down. His mechanics are perfect. He throws a beautiful spiral. He just looks like a quarterback. Now he's got 2 healthy ankles, which he didn't last year, so he can move better. Fran has said that. He wants to see Kyle move around like the kid he watched, as he put it, in Little League football, right? Kyle's nowhere near as mobile as a Garrett Schrader was, right? But he is the prototype, pro-style pocket quarterback. When you go down the list, and we saw the quarterback projection today, Carlos Del Rio Wilson, Michael Johnson Jr., who is new to the position. He's the son of Michael Johnson, who is the Syracuse co-offensive coordinator, tight ends coach, one of the few remaining coaches from the Dino Babers era, coming over to the Fran Brown era. Jakari Williams, who's a freshman in his first training camp, and, you know, that's a lot of pressure to put on him. There's a big gap between QB1 and the rest of the room, and that's something that I asked Fran about today. And here's what he said.
I want to see them all take steps. I want to see them competing every day. I would like to see a different guy go. I want it to be extremely hard for the coaching staff to decide who's the next guy. You know, and I want it to be hard. I thought little 4, Jakari, had a good day today, and also MJ did. You know, and then there was some throws that Carlos threw that was extremely good. So, like, those guys competed, and that's what we need. I want them to push. I want them to come to me and say, Coach, like, I should get some of the reps from Kyle. You know, that's what I'm hoping that we can develop that, because then that will help us, because we are building a program, not just a football team. So we want to make sure that guys will be able to go in the fourth quarter and do an amazing job for the team.
And I've said the stat a million times, Emily. The last Syracuse quarterback that went start to finish and did not get pulled either due to injury or performance was Ryan Nassib in 2012. So they need Kyle McCord to repeat that stat this year, flat out.
Yeah, definitely. I think we'll see if that kind of order changes throughout camp. I think at this point I would be surprised if Carlos is not the number 2 name on the depth chart, simply because he does have a leg up on Michael Johnson Jr. and Jakari, just that he knows a lot of the personnel here and has been around longer than them. He is the only other quarterback besides McCord that was here in the spring. And so both knows the personnel from the past 2 years and knows the personnel that came in the spring, those important receivers like Yazid Haynes, Jackson Meeks, all of those guys. And so unless something significant happens in the next 2 weeks, I think it will be Carlos that remains the number 2 on paper on the depth chart. But certainly as the season progresses, I would be intrigued to see if Jakari can make it into some of those games, late game situations, when hopefully Syracuse is up on some opponents and has the room to do that. But yeah, I mean the gap between Kyle and even Carlos, and then I think Carlos and those other 2 there's room there.
Michael Johnson Jr. was rated a top 10 dual threat quarterback. He went to Penn State. He was a highly rated quarterback. Now, this was a few years ago. This was 2019. He's just switched back to the position full time. So you got to keep that in mind. He's trying to get back in the flow of things, get the reps. You mentioned that Carlos just has more command of the offense and things that Jakari and Michael Johnson Jr. just simply don't have right now. Johnson throws a nice ball. I'll keep an eye on him more as we go through camp. But what I saw today, I'm like, he looks the part. He can do it. So we'll see how that progresses going forward. But right now, it's definitely a concern. From my guy Q's End Zone, who says, sometimes the best questions, Emily, are the simple ones. Does the team look bigger? Yes, it does. Okay. Washington being a prime example of that. But we saw it in the spring. Most guys are 10, 15 pounds heavier. The emphasis on training. As guys get older and progress and get into real weightlifting programs, you see them naturally get bigger. But I feel like everybody that we have encountered just looks to be in great shape. The training staff has put a heavy emphasis on this. And we talked to the head trainer today, and he kind of gave us a little sense of what they're doing and what they've got to do in camp. But the answer is definitely yes. And it's yes in the most important positions, Emily, offensive and defensive line.
Right. I think the biggest changes we'll see in body composition and size already happened. And we saw that they did that in the winter to get ready for spring. Chad Smith, who's the head strength and conditioning coach that we talked to today, he did say, like, obviously the focus in summer transitioned from putting on size, leaning down, putting on weight, but leaning down like fat, transitioned more into, okay, we have to do game ready skills and stuff like that. So the focus on the strength and conditioning shifted a little bit. And I would be surprised if there's like some guy from spring who we already saw have a big body difference jump, have another one in the fall, though I guess it's not impossible. But yeah, dating back to spring, everyone's gotten bigger. And then also you just look at who was brought in since spring, if you want to take it that way too. Guys like Savion Washington. And yeah, just everyone's bigger. I'm looking up at every player that we talk to.
No doubt. Matthew asks, is Dan Villari back to just playing tight end? The answer is yes. I did talk to Dan a little bit today, Matthew. I could almost sense relief coming from Villari that he can focus on being a tight end. He can focus on the position in terms of blocking, the techniques. You mentioned, Emily, it was lined up next to OG, so we're certainly going to see Villari out there in that tight end role. Dan also not very happy with his NCAA college football rating when I asked him about that and the bond that the teams had playing that. He thinks he got dogged on his speed a little bit. So he had a little fun with that question. But, man, Dan Villari did everything. I just think of that image of him in the press room after the Wake Forest game, and he's just covered in ice bags, and just how he and LaQuinn Allen had to carry so much of the load with the quarterback situation just ravaged by injury at the end of last year. Think of the transition he's made, Emily. He goes to Michigan as a quarterback. He wants to play quarterback at Syracuse. They switch him to tight end. He's thrown into that MacGyver offense they had to play last year. And now he gets to take a breath and just focus on being a tight end. He was also very pleased with Fran Brown's assessment that the tight ends are the toughest position on the team.
That doesn't surprise me that Dan was excited by that. I'm sure that makes sense. That checks out.
From Roger, who says the pace of practice looks to be much quicker and more purposeful than the last 8 years. He's right about that. I'll tell you, Emily, maybe we were just spoiled in the spring because that was just helter-skelter speed. Today was almost a little slower than what I was used to. And I think maybe the weather had something to do with that. It's day one. You're knocking off the rust. We're certainly going to see this team go at a frantic pace as camp goes. But, man, some of those spring practices, they were flying around like it was a NASCAR race.
Yeah, it was like a tad slower, not like less energetic, but no. I think definitely, like you said, the heat probably plays into that. We did hear that they took a 10-minute kind of water break, cooling off period at some point in practice, which makes sense. I mean, you go out on that turf and it's 10 degrees, 15 degrees hotter than it is just anywhere else. I will say, though, that we keep referencing back to that first drill we watched, and the offense was staying and kind of looping through, especially like the receivers and the running backs. But the defense, like once they got through each of their drives, they were being shooed away. And Elijah Robinson, I'm nicking out some cuss words here, but was like, go to Indy spot, and was like yelling at them to move and get going over to where they needed to be next so they could be ready. So there was still some sense of urgency there, but definitely a little bit of a shift, right? And I think to some degree that makes sense too, because when you're coming in the spring, you want to kind of go overboard to really emphasize how important that urgency is to you and that speed and that energy is. And once everyone understands that, then you can be maybe a little bit more flexible in, okay, well, we're trying to keep in mind that it's hot out, that this is day one, that all of this other stuff, these guys know that they're going to have to spring back and be fully energetic next week when it cools off, whatever. So I think that probably weighs into it as well.
Down the ladder very far, Emily, but I can relate in this sense. So I went to lacrosse camp up there for a few summers, and we played on the old coin field, as you said, 10 to 15 degrees hotter. There was a couple of camps I went to where it was like it is now. It's hot, it's humid, it's near 90. And then we had to trudge it back up. So if you're familiar with Syracuse and where the football facility is, and walk all the way up to where Mount Olympus is, one of the dorms, which is, it's literally, you're going up a big hill. So that's the worst. After it's 90 degrees, you're sweating, and I got to walk back to the dorm, right? So I just love that Fran's like just adding that little extra element to this is what camp's all about. I think we're going to find out a lot tomorrow, Emily, because practice is in the afternoon. We'll be at practice this time on Friday. It was hot and humid today, but it's going to be peak about 90. Humid heat index is up there if you're into, those meteorological terms, around 100. So they're really going to get pushed tomorrow. Today was hot. Tomorrow's going to be another hot day in Syracuse, and they're going to be out there in the middle of the afternoon. That's be very interesting to see if they're not in pads yet, but if tempers flare and if how things go temperature-wise tomorrow. That's going to be a key observation. And we'll be talking to defensive players tomorrow and how everybody handled that on day 2.
It's like Missouri weather out there. I thought I left that behind 3 years ago, leaving college, and it's the humidity is what gets me. It's that it was better today. Yesterday, like midday after that rainstorm that we kind of had in the morning. Oh, it was horrible. It was so humid.
The worst. That's what I hate about Central New York summers. I love Central New York summers, except when the humidity creeps in and I just bathe in the air conditioning. I'm a wimp. Ugh. I can't take the humidity out there. So
yeah, I mean,
but we'll be out there tomorrow.
Yeah, we will be out there, and it was really funny. Like everyone when we're doing interviews, like people shaking hands or like bumping elbows and being like, "I'm sorry, I'm so sweaty," and all of us are like, "We're sweaty." Like, no need to apologize. Everyone's sweaty here.
So that is the day 1 report. Emily and I will be back out there tomorrow. It's a 2:30-ish practice. I believe officially 2:25 p.m. is the start of practice. So just so you guys know, we get about a half hour usually to watch. And then there's an interview session when practice is over, which will be about 4:30-ish. So we will have a live podcast again on Friday. Not sure what time it's going to be. Estimated probably about 5:30. So it's Friday, end of the week. Have a little happy hour. Maybe Emily and I will have an adult beverage with you while we do the podcast. So, ideas have sprung. So probably about 5:30 or so, but this is the great benefit of being a Syracuse Sports Insider because we will text you directly. We'll keep you in the loop. We'll give you the practice updates, the videos that you guys are getting exclusively on our Syracuse Sports Insider text line, and we'll just keep you in the loop of what's going on. But this is going to be the rhythm going through training camp. We'll go to camp. We'll give you the observations. We'll go to interviews, and then we'll pod. Most of the time, it'll be live, so you guys are in the loop there and can feed us your questions. Please send us your questions. What do you want us to look for at practice? What questions do you have for the players and coaches? I'll keep you guys in the loop on the text line about who we're talking to, so you can ask specific questions of the people that we're going to be talking to as we go through camp. It's here. The pods are rolling, but being a Syracuse Sports Insider gives you an inside look into Syracuse football. So you can see it on your screen if you're watching on YouTube or watching the pod live, but if you're just listening, 315-847-3895. That is the text line. Text the word orange to that number. You get a 2-week free trial. It's just $3.99 a month after that, less than $1 a week to get that insider edge on Syracuse football. Because it's August, we're sweating, camp is here, and we're ready to go. But that is the conclusion of day 1's pod recap of Syracuse football training camp. Thank you, Emily, as always. So we'll be back with you live on Friday, and several times throughout training camp. So make sure you're subscribed, get that notification, and we'll let you know on the text line when the pods are coming. You guys enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Thanks for hanging with us here, and we'll be back with more on Friday.